The hollow life. Ethan Carter had everything a man was supposed to want. His name graced the door of a thriving architecture firm. His tailored suits hung in neat precision across his closet, and his house, an angular masterpiece of glass and stone, stood like a monument to success. Yet when the lights dimmed and the echo of silence filled its polished rooms, he could feel the truth. His life was a hollow shell. Marriage, once the anchor of his world, had become little more than a contract of convenience. Clara, his wife of 10 years, was beautiful in a magazine cover sort of way, but their love had evaporated long ago. She dined at charity banquets, traveled for work, and spoke to him as one might to a colleague, civil, distant, careful never to touch the aching loneliness buried under his composure. Their conversations rarely went beyond logistics, bills, schedules, appearances. He had not been touched, truly touched, in years. It was on a drizzling Thursday evening, at a charity dinner he had no wish to attend, that Ethan first saw Lila Morgan. She was nothing like the polished women who floated from table to table in designer gowns. Her dress was simple, almost understated, but her presence drew him like a whisper in a crowded room. She laughed softly at someone's remark, and the sound carried across the hall like a note of music, unexpected and warm. They spoke by accident, really. He had reached for a glass of wine at the same time she did. Their hands brushed. She apologized, quick smile flashing. He found himself lingering, asking her name, curious without quite knowing why. Lila. There was no artifice in the way she spoke. No polished charm, no rehearsed small talk. Her words carried an honesty Ethan had forgotten people could have. She admitted she didn't really belong at such events. She had come as a guest of a friend who left early. Her voice dipped, quiet, when she confessed she wasn't sure where she would go that night. It was an admission most would not dare to make, but it struck Ethan like a soft blow. In her eyes, he saw not weakness, but a weary kind of strength, the look of someone used to enduring without complaint. He should have walked away. That would have been easier, safer. Yet when the dinner ended and the guests spilled into the night, he found himself lingering beside her. She had no plan, no hotel booked. Something about that unsettled him more than it should have. "You can stay at my place," he heard himself say, surprising even his own ears. "Just for the night. I have a guest room." Lila hesitated. A flicker of caution crossed her face. Then, slowly, she nodded. The drive back was quiet. Rain whispered against the windshield, and Ethan's chest tightened with the awareness of what he was doing. It was nothing, he told himself. A decent gesture. A safe roof for someone who needed it. Yet every mile closer to his house felt like crossing a line he could not see, only sense. Clara was out of town, as she often was. The house loomed in darkness when they arrived, its glass walls reflecting the glow of the city. He let her in, showed her the guest room, tried to keep his voice steady and detached. But the air between them had changed. The house, once a cavern of emptiness, felt alive with the quiet rhythm of another person's breath. Lila set her small bag on the bed, then turned to him. "Thank you, Ethan. I know this is unusual." He managed to smile, though his pulse betrayed him. "It's nothing, just for one night." But as he closed the door behind him and stood alone in the hall, Ethan knew it was already something. He didn't yet understand what, but the stillness pressed on him differently now. He could hear faint movements from the guest room, the soft reminder that he was not alone. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel suffocating. Ethan lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling, Clara's absence heavy on one side of the bed, Lila's presence stirring on the other side of the wall. Guilt pricked at him, not because he had done anything yet, but because he knew what he was feeling. Curiosity, restlessness, the dangerous relief of no longer being invisible. Somewhere in that fragile space between exhaustion and wakefulness, he admitted a truth he had never allowed himself to voice. He was starving, not for success, not for money, but for something real. For warmth, for recognition, for the kind of connection that had become a foreign language in his own marriage. And though he had promised himself, and her, that it was only for one night, Ethan Carter understood deep down that nothing about this night would be simple. The forbidden flame. Morning arrived in muted tones, gray light slipping through the wide windows of Ethan's house. He had slept little, though he told himself it was only because of work pressing on his mind. In truth, he was restless from the thought of another presence beneath his roof. When he walked into the kitchen, he found Lila already there. She was standing by the counter, barefoot, her hair loose, pouring water into the kettle as though she had lived there all her life. The sight struck him with a strange mixture of comfort and danger. "Good morning," she said, her voice low, careful not to disturb the stillness of the house. Ethan nodded, trying to mask the sudden warmth that rose in his chest. "You didn't have to make anything." "I could have. I couldn't sleep," she interrupted gently. "Thought I'd at least make some tea." It was a small act, but it unsettled him. Clara never rose early, never fussed in the kitchen. Their mornings were soundless affairs, two people moving around each other like strangers. And here was this woman, someone he had met only yesterday, filling the silence with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. They sat together at the long kitchen island, steam curling between them. Lila held her cup in both hands, and for a while, neither spoke. Then she asked, almost casually, "Are you happy, Ethan?" The question pierced deeper than he expected. He could have lied, could have deflected with the well-polished answers he gave colleagues and friends. But under Lila's gaze, clear, steady, unpretentious, the truth slipped out. "No," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Not for a long time." Lila's expression softened, but she didn't pity him. Instead, she nodded as if she understood too well. "Happiness can be fragile. You think it's permanent, then one day it's gone, and you learn to live without it." Their eyes met across the table, and Ethan felt the weight of her words settle between them. There was something unspoken, something that bound them, two people carrying wounds they rarely revealed. Later that day, he should have gone to the office, buried himself in work, returned to the safety of routine. But when Lila asked if she could stay a little longer, just until she sorted things out, he heard himself say yes. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it was kindness. But beneath those excuses pulsed a quiet, reckless truth. He didn't want her to leave. Days blurred. She remained, inhabiting his house in ways subtle but undeniable. She cooked small meals, left books on the coffee table, filled the air with traces of music from her phone. She was careful never to intrude, yet her presence threaded into every corner of his life. Ethan found himself seeking her out in the evenings. They would sit together with tea or wine, conversations meandering from trivialities to confessions. He spoke of his youth, of how ambition had consumed him, of how his marriage had eroded piece by piece until it was only a performance. Lila listened without judgment, her eyes alive with understanding. And in return, she shared fragments of herself. How she had given years to a man who betrayed her trust, how she had once believed love could survive anything, and how she now carried a scar she couldn't quite erase. With every word, with every shared silence, the boundary between them thinned. He began to notice small details, the way her laughter lingered in a room, the way her fingers brushed hair from her face, the way her presence eased the constant heaviness in his chest. It was, he realized, a kind of infidelity already, not of the body, but of the soul. For he had not spoken to Clara this way in years. He had not looked at her and felt alive. One evening, the rain returned. It drummed against the glass walls, a relentless rhythm. Ethan poured wine, and they sat in the dim glow of a lamp, shadows softening the edges of the room. Lila was quiet, watching the rain, her thoughts distant. "You're not used to having company, are you?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "No, not like this." Her gaze lingered on him, searching, as if she saw more than he wished to reveal. The air shifted, charged with something fragile yet undeniable. For a moment, neither moved. The distance between them was small, yet it pulsed like a fault line waiting to break. Lila turned away first, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Careful, Ethan. Some lines, once crossed, can't be undone." Her words should have been a warning. Instead, they ignited him, confirming what he had already begun to feel, that the line had been crossed the moment he let her in. That night, as he lay awake listening to the storm, he knew the conflict that now consumed him. He was still a husband. He was still bound to Clara, but he could no longer deny what stirred within him. He was falling for the one woman he had promised himself would only stay for one night. Crossing the line, the storm arrived in full force that evening, thunder rolling across the sky, lightning flashing against the glass walls of Ethan's house. He had always hated nights like this. The noise, the chaos, the reminder of forces far beyond his control. But tonight, the storm seemed almost intimate, a backdrop to the turmoil already raging inside him. Lila was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her hair catching the faint light of the lamp. She looked up when he entered the room, her expression soft but unreadable. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. Ethan shook his head, pouring himself a drink before sitting across from her. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the percussion of rain. For days he had battled the growing pull toward her, convincing himself it was nothing more than gratitude, that what he felt was harmless. But now, with the storm outside and her presence so near, the excuses crumbled. She shifted, her eyes lingering on him. "You carry so much, Ethan. It's written all over you. The weight, the loneliness." Her words cut too close, unraveling the restraint he had built. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just the woman before him, but the reflection of his own ache. Two souls bruised by betrayal, each searching for something they had long been denied. "I don't even remember the last time someone asked how I was," he confessed. His voice was raw, unsteady. "Clara and I, we live like strangers. We perform the part of marriage, but there's nothing left. No warmth, no touch, nothing." Lila set her cup down, her gaze steady. That kind of emptiness can break a person. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fighting the war inside him. He knew what was happening, knew what would come if he let go. Yet every fiber of him longed to surrender. "You should go to bed," he said, though the words lacked conviction. "Do you want me to?" Her question was simple, but it stripped away every shield he had left. The space between them felt electric, every breath charged. Ethan rose slowly, as if pulled by an unseen force, and crossed the small distance to sit beside her. Their shoulders brushed, the touch so light yet so shattering. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lila turned toward him, her face inches from his. He could see the rise and fall of her breath, the uncertainty mingled with desire. "This is wrong," he whispered, though he didn't move away. "Maybe," she murmured, "but sometimes wrong is the only thing that feels real." The words unlocked something in him. He reached for her, and their lips met in a kiss that began tentative but deepened with urgency. It was not the reckless hunger of strangers. It was something rawer, born of years of deprivation. Her hands cupped his face, anchoring him, while his arms wrapped around her as though he feared she might vanish. The storm outside raged, but inside, everything stilled. For the first time in years, Ethan felt alive, every nerve, every heartbeat answering to the woman in his arms. They moved together slowly, almost reverently, as though healing rather than destroying. It was not lust alone that guided them, but the desperate need for connection. When they finally drew apart, breathless and trembling, the guilt came rushing in like a tide. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "God, what have I done?" Lila touched his arm, her expression tender, not condemning. "You let yourself feel again. That's all." But he shook his head, torn between relief and shame. He was still a married man, bound to Clara by vows, however hollow they had become. Yet in this moment, he could not regret what had happened. Lila's hand slipped into his, her grip gentle but sure. "I'm not here to ruin your life, Ethan. I never wanted that. But don't deny what this means to you. Don't pretend it didn't matter." He met her eyes, and the truth was undeniable. It had mattered, more than anything. When the storm finally eased, the house was quiet again, but nothing inside him was the same. He knew there was no going back to the way things had been. A line had been crossed, one that could never be erased. As Lila rested her head against his shoulder, Ethan closed his eyes. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. Guilt, consequences, choices he wasn't ready to make. But for now, in the fragile stillness after the storm, he allowed himself one dangerous truth. He had been broken for so long, and tonight, with her, he had begun to feel whole again. The awakening. The morning after felt quieter than it should have, as though the house itself knew what had transpired. Sunlight crept through the glass walls, soft and forgiving, but Ethan Carter felt anything but absolved. He lay awake long before rising, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the weight of his choices. Beside him, the bed was empty. Lila had returned to the guest room sometime before dawn, leaving only the faint trace of her perfume lingering on the sheets. That lingering presence, intimate and undeniable, was a reminder of the line he had crossed. When he finally entered the kitchen, she was already there, sipping tea, her expression calm. Yet in her eyes, he caught the same conflict that tore at him, tenderness laced with guilt. "Morning," she said, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "Morning," he echoed, though the words stuck in his throat. For a while, silence stretched between them. Then Ethan spoke, his voice rough. "I don't know how to live with what we did." Lila set her cup down carefully. "You live by accepting it for what it was, a moment of truth. We gave each other something we both needed. That doesn't have to be shameful." Her composure only deepened his turmoil. He wanted to believe her, but the shadow of his marriage loomed. Clara, the life they had built, however hollow. He had betrayed it, and though part of him felt alive again, another part felt unmoored, guilty, terrified of what came next. That evening, Clara called. Her voice was clipped, businesslike, discussing her return in 2 days. Not once did she ask how he was, whether he missed her, or if he even cared she was away. When the call ended, Ethan sat in silence, the emptiness of her words ringing louder than ever. Lila watched him carefully. "You don't have to tell me," she said softly. "But I can see it. She doesn't see you, Ethan. She hasn't for a long time." He met her gaze, raw with vulnerability. "And you do." "I do," she said simply. The words pierced him, not because they were grand, but because they were true. She saw him, the broken man behind the façade, the loneliness he had hidden from the world. In her presence, he had been stripped bare, yet he felt more whole than he had in years. Days passed, but the spell of that night lingered. Ethan moved through his routines with Lila quietly inhabiting his home, yet every glance, every brush of her hand carried the weight of unspoken desire. He wanted her to stay, but he also knew the longer she remained, the deeper the fracture in his life would grow. On the morning of Clara's return, Lila stood by the window, her bag packed at her side. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "It's time, Ethan. I can't stay here any longer." His chest tightened. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do," she said, turning to face him at last. "You needed me for a reason. To remind you you're still alive. To remind you that you're worth more than silence and emptiness. But I can't be the reason you destroy everything else. That's not love, it's escape." Her words struck with the clarity of truth. He wanted to argue, to hold her back, but deep down he knew she was right. What they had shared was real, but it could not become permanent. It wasn't meant to. She stepped closer, placing a hand against his cheek. Sometimes love isn't about staying. Sometimes it's about showing someone what they've forgotten. His throat tightened as he pulled her into an embrace. It was not desperate, but reverent, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was goodbye. When she left, the house felt hollow again. Yet it was not the same kind of emptiness he had known before. There was a difference now, a spark within him, a reminder that he could no longer accept a life built on absence. That night, Clara returned. Ethan greeted her, the motions familiar, the distance palpable. But as he stood across from her, he realized something fundamental had shifted. He could no longer pretend. He could no longer live untouched, unseen. The road ahead would be difficult. Confrontations, choices, perhaps endings he had feared to face. But for the first time in years, he felt ready. Lila had awakened something within him, something no storm of guilt could wash away. Ethan Carter had let her stay for one night. Yet that night had stretched into something far greater, long enough to remind him of who he was, long enough to mend the fractures of his soul. And though she was gone, her presence remained, not as a shadow of betrayal, but as a spark of truth he could never unlearn.